Hey guys, welcome back to another Helix video. Today I'm going to do a patch build for you guys, starting from scratch, and kind of share some tips and tricks and some concepts that I use that work for me. If you like the sounds I get, hopefully they'll work for you as well. I've done a couple of these before in older videos on my channel, but yeah, I've learned a couple things since then with Helix specifically, and also I've had recently some lengthy discussions in the comment section of my videos. People asking specific questions about EQ, principles of EQing and compression and just overall setup. So I figured it'd be worthwhile just to do another one, and I like doing these videos, so worked out. So I'm going to start with just a clean slate. We're going to build it up. A lot of these things that I'm going to talk about really can be applied with any guitar device. You don't have to be using Helix, because a lot of it's going to deal with EQ and levels and compression. These are things that will pretty much apply across the board. So even if you're not a Helix user, some of this might be pretty useful to you. So let's get started. One of the things I'm going to do right off the bat is I'm going to put a looper right in the front end of this patch. You'll see in a minute why I'm going to do that. This won't stay here long term, but we are going to have a use for it. I'm just going to come around here and just throw an amp in. I'm just going to go with my personal favorite. It is the Litigator model. Absolutely love this amp model. Just can't say enough good things about it. What I might do at the end of the video is once we get things all built out, I might swap around different amp models just to let you see how once you kind of get your framework put together, you can really kind of easily swap in and out amps and have a good starting point where you're not reinventing the wheel every time you come up with a new patch idea or you want to try a new amp. You have something to work with. So as far as this goes, I'm just going to bump the channel volume up, and also I'm going to run down to path 2 for the cabs. Now this is Helix specific. Each path is its own DSP chip. So by chaining the two paths together, you're leveraging all of the horsepower that Helix has to offer, and you get more blocks to work with, more DSP to work with. So it's definitely a concept I like using. I'm going to go ahead. I use the stock cabs. I know a lot of guys out there use IRs. That's great. I use stock cabs for a couple of reasons. First and foremost, it's easier to me. I don't have to, now that it's actually the update process has gotten a lot simpler with the backups and restores, but it was quite, I mean, not challenging, but it was just another step of things to do when you updated. You had to make sure you backed up your IRs, reloaded them into the same slots for them to work in your patches and so forth. And quite honestly, I was just too lazy to do that. And I like the stock cabs just fine once I got them set up. So I do like to use the dual cab block. So I get 2 cabs for the price of one, essentially. As far as real estate, it does use a little more DSP than the single cab block. The 2x12 Interstate or Dr. Z cab is one of my favorites. I also really like the 4x12 Greenback. This just comes from experimenting and finding that these are 2 of the cabinets that I really like. Another thing I've been doing recently, I'm just going to paste this in from another one of my patches. So on the Facebook group, Chad Boston came out with some patches using a parametric EQ to simulate a cab or an IR. Because in essence, in a very stripped down basic way, a cab block or an IR is an EQ basic. And there's a little more to it than that, but that's essentially what it is. So it makes sense. If you had the right EQ settings, you could make a pretty good sounding cabinet emulation. So for me personally, I found that this EQ block on its own was okay. It didn't really get me the tone that I like by itself. But what I did find was when I would run it in parallel with one of the stock cab blocks, it just helped fill things out a little bit. So that's what I did, and I've changed the settings a little bit. I don't remember to what degree, but you can download this patch and try it out for yourself. I know I adjusted the gain on the high and mids, I believe, and maybe a little bit I don't think I touched the frequency maybe, but I think I just changed the levels a little bit. Not a whole lot though, but it just kind of, if you think about the guitar, it occupies a certain space in the sonic spectrum of the frequency range. Adding the EQ block, because it was hitting frequencies that the cab block wasn't hitting, it just kind of gives it a wider footprint, a bigger profile, if you will. So right now I'm really liking it, so I've been using it on all the new patches I've been building. Going back to the cab block itself, I'll talk about the mics I like to use. Before I do that, I will say, as just a general rule, I like to cut about 80 hertz or so, just in general on the low end, because there's really nothing the electric guitar needs to be, at least not with any tones I use. There's nothing that needs to be happening below 80 hertz. I'll roll off the highs to about 11K to start and see how that works. If it sounds dull at all, I can bump that up. Generally, I find if anything, I either leave it alone or may pull it down a little bit. As far as microphone choices, so my favorite microphones, the 57 Dynamic. I mean, it's a classic. It's an SM57 model. It's been used on countless records. If you want a very present, bright, in-your-face sound, it's a great mic for that. I also like the 121 Ribbon. It's a little fuller, rounder, not quite as bright. And I enjoy the condensers as well. The 84, 67 are two of my favorites. But play around with these. I mean, there's, me personally, the 57 is about the only dynamic mic that I like. All the ribbons I enjoy, and I like the condensers. But it's all personal preference. See what works for you. I'm going to go with the 121 for right now. We may end up switching that around before it's all said and done. Another thing I'm going to do real quick, coming back to the amp model, I'm going to back the gain off just a little bit, because again, this is how I build a patch. I like to set the amp up to where it's generally on the edge of breakup, and then I like to use drive pedals to kind of gain stage to get me to the crunch or drive or whatever it is I want to get to. Before I play anything, let's also go and add just a little bit of reverb. I'll use one of the new ones. So my philosophy on reverb is, I just wanted to add some air to the mix. I'm not looking to drown it. Now, if you're going for an ambient sound, that's a whole different thing. But this is just kind of a meat and potatoes kind of blues, rock, crunch, kind of sound. So let's see where we're at. Reverb-wise, that's pretty good. I'm just glancing down at my DAW here, my recording software. One thing that is very important, and this is universal across the board, you want your input and output levels to be nice and strong. This is one area, if you don't get this right, you're not going to get a very full, present sound. Especially in digital, the farther away from unity gain or 0 dB you get, the more resolution you lose. So this is a pretty important step in my opinion. So I like to try to keep my tone, or my signal rather. Sorry, I don't have my glasses on. I'm having to squint. I like to try to keep my signal definitely above -6 dB, and I really like for it to rest somewhere around -3-ish. And then that leaves me a little bit of room for a solo boost and without getting in the clipping range. So -3, -4 dB. Right now, let's see. I'm hovering around -9. So I'm just going to use the output boost. Some people have actually, I had a discussion about this with someone. The USB recording level is maybe a little lower than the general output level of Helix. So this is a step, if you download this patch, you may find when you plug it into an amp or PA, you may have to back down. This may be too hot, but the recording levels generally aren't as hot. So I'm going to boost this to work in a recording environment. Just take note, you can bring this back down and bring the channel volume back down also on the amp if you need to, if you find that this is the patch is too hot. So let's start around 3 dB. Let's boost it up a little bit more. Just a little bit more. I'm hitting about -5.5 right now. All right, so I'm about -4.5 dB. That's fine. That's fine. This is going to work for example. This, I'm leaving myself enough room to when I start adding drives and compression and solo boost, I still have, you know, about 4 dB to play with. So anyway, here's where we're at so far. So it's a good clean tone. I want to boost the gain just a little bit. Because I want just a tiny bit of breakup when I really hit it, and but to clean up when I want it to be clean. I mean, personally, that's about what I'm looking for. If I flip to the bridge and really smack it. If I pick lightly. That's kind of where I like it to be. If you like it a little cleaner, you can back the drive off. Again, we're gonna add gain with some pedals, so I'm not too worried about that yet. Another thing I generally like to do is throw a compressor on the front end of the signal chain. I like the Deluxe Comp because I use a lot of I do a lot of recording, so the Deluxe compressor has a lot of the parameters I'm used to seeing when I'm recording. I like being able to set the ratio and threshold and those sorts of things. So I find the main thing, I don't want to really squeeze it, so 2 to 1 is really okay. I'm just looking to push the front end of the amp a little harder, just give us a little more attack. You kind of hear it's got a little pop to it. So right already, you know, if I was just going to do some blues thing, you know. That's a very workable tone and for what I like. And I mean, essentially we have a little bit of compression, the amp. We have kind of a parallel cab thing going on, and then we have some reverb. So before I get into the effects, another thing I find that I like to do is go ahead and throw a parametric EQ at the end. And it may be a little early in the build to kind of start thinking about this, but to kind of finish the tone, I like having this EQ here. Actually, I'm going to go ahead and start doing some drive stuff and come back to this. We'll come back to this block, but I like having an EQ at the very end just to kind of take away or add certain frequencies that just aren't quite getting there. So I'm going to actually bypass this for right now. Kind of got ahead of myself. So let's go back up front here and start thinking about distortion. I almost always like to add a minotaur to the patch. It's what they call a transparent overdrive. I know it's kind of a cliche word, but essentially what you have is you're adding gain without really any crazy spikes anywhere in the EQ curve. So you're not getting any, you know, mid-range humps or anything of that nature. At least that's the theory behind something like the Minotaur. You're just getting added gain. So. So with the combination of the compressor and the Minotaur, I think you get that smack on the front end of the amp. Which I really, that's a good sound to my ears. Kind of gives me that cranked plexi tone when I throw the Minotaur on there. If I want to also have like a more proper distortion channel, kind of like a really higher gain, I like combining the Timmy and Minotaur together. Yeah, the settings are pretty even right now. So you're getting more into distortion territory. Forgot to turn the input gate on. There we go, goodbye noise. So you're getting into more distortion. But it's still, you still get a lot of clarity and definition with these two. So you've got, you know, a good amount of drive there. But it's still clear. You can hear every note being played. It's not mushy. Even with those on, you can back down on the volume knob quite a bit. There's a nice kind of dynamic range. You know, more so with, say, just the minotaur turned on. You can really go from that clean to dirty with just the volume knob with that one on. So that's kind of how I think about it in terms of, I'll have the minotaur for crunch. I'll have something like the Timmy. I can stack that for a, you know, distortion sound. And then when I start to think about lead sounds, I like to throw in a distortion pedal with a little more of a pronounced mid-range. The Tube Screamer or the Hedgehog D9 are both favorites of mine. So I'm going to throw just a Tube Screamer in there. So now we have, again, the Tube Screamer is definitely known to have this kind of mid-range hump with it. So it's not the same kind of transparency, just more, as we have with the other two drives, but that's on purpose. And when you get in the context of a band, you know, you've got the bass guitar, you've got the drums, maybe a keyboard, you've got the vocals, and acoustic guitar, maybe another electric guitar. So when you go to take a lead, we're going to kind of do a lead boost option here as well. But you also can leverage just fitting the guitar into a different sonic space as the other instruments are occupying. So therefore, you can kind of use EQ to kind of bring yourself more forward in the mix without having to worry even as much about volume jumps. Because you don't want to just take people's heads off, you know, just with volume, when you can actually just shift your tone a little bit and get out front that way. So that is kind of my very typical distortion chain. I like those three blocks. And those are pretty much the three I like to use. Sometimes I'll switch out the Hedgehog D9 for the Tube Screamer if I want a little more aggressive sound. But I certainly am happy with these three. So coming back down to the bottom end here, I always like to throw a delay in the mix. Let's go ahead and switch over to stereo. Memory Man is really my favorite, and I'm kind of hooked on the dotted eighth sound. That, again, it comes down to preference. The nice thing about having it assigned to a note value is you can use the tap tempo to set it up, you know, to kind of tap it, whatever song you're playing. I mean, you may just want straight eighth notes or quarter notes or 16th notes or the dotted sound, but I really like setting it that way rather than just you know, just in milliseconds, because I like being able to control it with a tap tempo. So anyway, a little bit of delay on, and tell you what, let's throw the Tube Screamer back on just to kind of get more in the lead mode. Here's what that sounds like. So, you know, just adds a little bit of space to it. I I'm not really for this delay. I'm not really. It is a dotted eighth, but I'm not really thinking in terms of using it as a rhythmic part to the song. There are times I did a YouTube patch. You can check that out on my channel where the delay is used very much as part of the tone and all that. But this is really just set up. You just set the time value for whatever you find comfortable. But this is just kind of set up to add some air to it. So basically, with where we're at, I'm going to save it. We have a basic cleanish sound. We have a couple stages of drive. We have the tube screamer there to add kind of a lead EQ punch. We have a delay pedal. So just a few other things that again, I like to do. I like to add. I'm going to throw Univibe on. I really like the Univibe model. I actually like it in front of the amp. Typically with modulation effects, you think of putting them after the amp, but when you think about like Hendrix, he really used all these effects going into the front end of a Marshall Plexi typically. So it's more reminiscent of the sounds I'm used to thinking about with, like, say, a Univibe. And same thing with Van Halen, with flangers and phasers, he would run them straight into the front of a Marshall. So don't be afraid to kind of break the rules of, modulation and delays go after the amp, and delay or distortions and such stuff like that go in front. That's a general rule of thumb, but don't be afraid to experiment. So yeah, here's what the Univibe sounds like. That's just kind of fun. So you can, of course, that's just set on a particular rate. You can change the rate. You can also use this button to set it to a time value, again, where you can tap in the value. Just depends. Univibe, I don't find quite as much a necessity to keep it in time with what I'm doing. I just like kind of a slower rate. So I normally just kind of find a place I like it and leave it alone. So there's kind of the meat and potatoes of a patch. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to go back to the looper, and I put it to the front of the chain for the reason when it's in front of everything. When you create a loop, anything that you change after the fact is going to be affected. So if I was to put the loop at the very end, once I recorded it, it's recorded, it's going to sound like that. But at the front, I can record something, and then I can make changes to the tone and kind of see what happens from there. So let's see. Let's assign it to a foot switch. I'm going to right click, bypass assign to foot switch 11. So now I can come down here and control it. Let's just do a basic clean sound for now. Turn off everything but the amp. All right, so I've got this loop recorded. So now what I'm going to do, I'm going to turn this parametric EQ back on down here. I'm going to play the loop back, and I'm just going to start adjusting things just to see what it sounds like. I might turn on the Minotaur, and, just to make sure the changes I make are going to kind of play nice with everything. So. Okay, so what I like to do, this is kind of a trick from doing recording, is I will take, like, I'll start, say, with the highs. I'll boost it way more dB than I know I'm going to end up boosting it. And I'll sweep the frequency range. I'll do the same thing with the mids and the lows. So once you kind of find, there's two ways to do it. You can kind of sweep it and find where, okay, that's pleasant. That's adding some pleasantness, and then back off to where it's just enough and not too much. The other way to kind of use the parametric EQ is to end up cutting. So what you can do is you can boost it way up. So you're boosting the mid frequency, sweep it, and then sweep it until you find a spot to where it doesn't sound good. It's adding a nasal or unpleasant tone. What you can do at that point is you can then cut some dB off of that frequency. And so that can help take out, like if you've got it kind of you feel like there's a problem area in the sound and the tone you're getting, that's a good way to kind of isolate the frequency. And then once you find that nasty section, cut it out. And then this Q control that you see on the low, mid, and high, that is like how wide it's cutting. So you experiment with that. You know, the Q set to one end of the spectrum is just cutting a very narrow strip. And the further you widen the Q, the further that expands. So just some kind of general parametric EQ advice there. What would be great in a future update, I would love it if a lot of the ones I use in my DAW, you can see basically as you play, you'll be able to see the frequency spectrum react. So you can actually visually see where the frequencies are, what they're doing, where they're peaking, where they're high, where they're low. I mean, you can of course do it by ear, but I'm a very visual person, and I kind of like having that visual feedback. So that would be, I don't know that that'll ever come to Helix, but it'd be really cool if it did. So let's see. Let's throw, now if you want a solo boost, a lead boost, one of the things, you can do a couple of things, actually. In older videos, when I first started using Helix, what I would do, and this works, is I would assign a foot switch to, say, just the main output level. So I could use that to give myself, you know, another 5 or 6 dB boost, whatever I wanted. And that works. That takes your tone and just makes it louder. Kind of going back to when I was talking about the Tube Screamer, adding some mid-range and adding some frequencies to the tone. What I've found I really like doing now is I'll just add the Cali Q graphic, which is the graphic EQ from the Mesa Mark IV model. So I'll come in here just for kind of put something together real quick. Throw a little boost right here in the middle sections, the 750 and the 2.2K area, and then about a 1.5 dB boost overall. I'm going to assign that to a foot switch just so I can go ahead and flip it back and forth and let you hear it. So this is, and I'm also going to kind of keep an eye to make sure that I'm not now clipping when I add this, which I am, so it's a little too much. About a 0.5 dB overall. So it's just a little too hot. So what I could do now, actually, if I like the tone that this EQ is adding for leads, I could just back my overall volume down on this master output to leave myself a little more room for the EQ, but it's fine. I'll just back this off here. So this is really, really mild, but actually it's a little too mild. Let me do that. Let me back off a dB here, because the whole point is to give us a little more volume when we go to do a lead. So let's bump this back up. Let's see. So we're not clipping anymore. That's good. So I might still do a little more. This is just part of patch building. You kind of go down a certain path and realize, okay, well, I didn't allow enough space for this to happen, so it's fine. Just make some minor adjustments. Okay, so that gives us a nice little 2 dB boost overall. Slight boost in the mid-range. And then in conjunction with, say, a tube screamer. Yeah. So it's adding a little bit in the mid-range, a little bit in the volume, but it's not obnoxious. You may have to play around with this in a band context just to make sure, okay, I am getting enough boost. Here in the headphones, this is boosting enough to kind of make sense. So anyway, now we've kind of got our sound where we want it. Guess I better save. That's another thing I should have said a long time ago. Save frequently. You never know when you might make a mistake, pull a block out by accident, or flip to another preset by accident, which can happen. So save frequently. Tone-wise, I'm kind of in an okay place with this. So I'm going to pull this looper out and throw a wah up here. I'm not really that particular about the wahs. They're all kind of, I like any of the ones that I can set the frequency on. So about 300 hertz to about 1.5K tends to be what I like. I like to pull the mix down to about 80%. So you're getting a little bit of the straight guitar. No, that works. Sounds like a wah to me. So now, just a couple things. Let's go ahead and start assigning foot switches. So let's see, where do I want to put this one? This is something that's actually easier to do on the unit itself, but thanks to the capacitive switches, you can just select the effect, you know, touch with a finger or your bare feet the switch that you want to assign it to, and you can do it. It's actually kind of easier that way. But so we've got these assigned. Let's see. Let's throw this on foot switch. Let's do 4 for that one. Put this one on 1. We've got the EQ boost on 1 already. So now we have a very workable tone, covers a lot of ground, can do a number of things well. We can cover clean to, you know, pretty full-on drive. There's still plenty of room. You know, I can pull this down another path and give ourselves lots of more space to add blocks. We have, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, another 4 spots down here. You can do, a lot of times I'll generally run at least 2 delays in my patches. I like one that's where I'll set it. I'll still set it to a dotted eighth, but set to stereo. But I'll have it set to where it's just like 1 repeat, but the mix is the same as the main guitar signal. So in conjunction with both delays on, it can kind of, when you're doing rhythm playing, it can kind of help fill out. You know, let's go ahead and assign that one to a foot switch. Sure, let's do, whoops, that's not the one I meant to do. This is why it's easier just to touch it with your finger, and then you don't have to try to remember in your mind which foot switch is which. All right, so yeah, this is a pretty complete patch. Still lots of room. You know, you can expand it if you wanted to do some more ambient stuff. You got room to throw more of the new reverbs on there. If you want to get something like really wet. So, you know, to me, like, we're kind of where we want to be. This is a nice, cover a lot of bases. I would consider this a good starting patch. I mean, it can go as is for just straight ahead rock gigs, but there's still room to do more out there specialty kind of stuff if you want to. DSP wise, I think we've still got some room. Let's see. Yeah, I mean, we could still add any of the reverbs. Let's make sure. Yep, even stereo, we could still add any of the reverbs. You know, any of the stereo. You know, we're not really out of DSP. Let me just pull this down temporarily. See where we're at DSP wise up here. I know we wouldn't probably add reverb up here. I just want to see what these are fairly heavy DSP usage wise. Yeah. So yeah, I mean, we're good on DSP. We got plenty of headroom left. So, you know, there's a lot more you could do with this. As promised, now that we kind of have it where we wanted it saved, let's just swap it out, one amp for another, just to see how easily that would work and what we could do with it. I recently did a video on the Lone Star. That's one of the new ones. So let's see. Let's bring the drive again. This is, you know, definitely set up for more of a lighter gain kind of situation. Masters. You know, not bad. I mean, this EQ was dialed in for the other amp model. But you see, we're already, I mean, it's not bad. You know, we can definitely work with it. So, you know, like I said, this makes a good template where you can just kind of, for lower to mid gain stuff, you can just kind of throw different stuff in. Let's try one more. Well, let's see. Let's try the train wreck. This is a bit higher gain. Whoops. Anyway, again, I mean, you would want to do a little bit of EQ work and change some things to really dial it in. But gosh, you know, that gives us a really great starting point. It's not like you're starting with a blank patch and you got to just, you know, start from square one. I will say definitely as you go from amp model to amp model, you know, that's where you could come in here and experiment with the cabs and the mics. Matter of fact, with this kind of more high gain, let's switch over to the dynamic mics and see what that sounds like. Let's turn this off. Yeah, I like that a bit better. I can bring a little more low end back in. So yeah, I mean, just change the microphones on the cabinet, or you could try, you know, a couple different 4x12s, or, you know, if you want a little beefier sound. But, you know, again, the point is you're really close to a very workable tone. Swap your amps around, and then you have a place to start with. And then you already have some drives built in, so your delays are built in, a little bit of modulation. You know, if you don't like the Univibe, throw a phaser or a flanger in there, take it out, whatever. Your lead boost. You know, you can come down here and, you know, like I said, live, if this patch is too hot live, because it probably will be because it works over USB recording, so it's probably going to be too hot live. So just pull that down to where you need it to be, and you change the channel volume as well to where you need it to be. But you know, that kind of sums it up. You know, that's kind of my approach to patch building. Now, granted, I tend to go for a more specific kind of sound, which is this low gain to mid gain sound. I'm not a heavy gain user. I don't think I've ever built a patch with dual rectifiers or anything like that. So, you know, if this is your style, hopefully this will work. And one thing I actually did want to mention earlier when I started out, I mentioned that this is like my go-to cab setup. the cab modeling has come a long way, especially in Helix. I remember back in the XT Live, the X3 Live, the HD500, HD500X. I went through all those. That's when I think the cab modeling was really kind of the weaker link between the two. The amp modeling, I think, was pretty good. The cab modeling was okay. But what I found, you know, really a technique I used from the X3 Live or XT Live up was I would find a cab, I'd find a mic that worked, that I'd liked it, the character was what I liked. So from there, I would just change the amp models in front of it. So it really took out the guesswork of flipping through cabs and then flipping through mics and doing all that stuff. So I kind of have continued to use that philosophy in something like Helix. Now, these cabs sound way better. The mic choices sound way better. So there's definitely a lot of different tones in here to explore. I'm just telling you how I do it. You know, take it from there. Do what works for you. Tone is very subjective. What sounds good to one person is maybe doesn't sound good to another, and vice versa. So anyway, I'll post a link to this video, a link to this patch in the video description. I've been talking too long, I guess. So you can download this patch and play around with it. Maybe it'll work well as a template for you, and see what you think. I'll revert it back to the litigator, kind of how we had it before we started moving the amps around. So anyway, I hope this was useful and helpful in some way to you guys. So let me know what you think in the comments below. Please like, subscribe, all that good stuff. And I do really enjoy the feedback I get from you guys. So yeah, please let me know what you think. If it's helpful, you know, what you like about it, or videos you'd like to see moving forward. Like I said, I kind of had gotten away from the more instructional stuff into just like demoing patches and giving out the patches. So if there's more kind of functionality kind of stuff that you'd like me to revisit with Helix, just let me know. So anyway, thanks again for watching, and we'll see you next time.